What if I told you that the most powerful military machine on Earth lost a war to a road that didn't officially exist? No satellites could stop it, no bombs could erase it, and no map could fully capture it. Hidden under jungles, mountains, and rivers, this supply route moved armies swept beset, and history itself right under the enemy's nose. This is the mystery of Ho Chi Minh Trail, the challenge no one should have solved by the early 1960s. North Vietnam was staring at a problem that, on paper, simply could not be solved. Imagine this for a moment. You need to supply tens of thousands of soldiers fighting hundreds of miles away. They need food, they need weapons, they need fuel, if they need medicine, and they need all of it, continuously, day after day, year after year. Now remove everything modern armies depend on. No secure highways, no deep water ports, no air superiority, and, above all, no protection from the most advanced air force on Earth. Every movement you make is watched. Every path you open is bombed. Every mistake costs lives. This was the reality facing North Vietnam, and the landscape offered no mercy. Dense jungles swallowed visibility, mountains rose like walls, monsoon rains turned soil into rivers of mud, and above it all, American aircraft circled constantly, dropping bombs, deploying sensors, and stripping forests bare. From a Western military perspective, this situation was hopeless. Traditional doctrine says supply lines must be visible, protected, and fast. Cut the supply line, and the army collapses. That's how wars are won. So American planners believed the solution was obvious. Find the supply, destroy it, repeat until nothing moves. But here's the first crack in that logic. There was no single road to destroy. What later became known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail was not a road in the way Americans understood roads. It wasn't a line on a map, it wasn't fixed. It wasn't permanent, it was something far more unsettling. It was an idea, a constantly shifting network of paths, tracks, river crossings, hidden depots, and human movement stretching through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, a system that could disappear overnight and reappear somewhere else. By dawn. 2, the pilots flying overhead, it looked like nothing. 2 military analysts, it shouldn't have worked. Ask yourself this question: how do you defeat an enemy supply system? When the terrain hides it, the people rebuild it, and destruction only forces it to adapt. Every bomb that created a path didn't end the flow, it simply redirected it. Every destroyed bridge was replaced by a ferry, a bypass, or human backs carrying loads through the jungle. This wasn't logistics powered by machinery, it was logistics powered by endurance, by will, by a belief that if the system broke, it would be rebuilt again and again, no matter the cost, by conventional military logic. This supply network should have collapsed within months. Instead, it survived for years, and that survival wasn't accidental. It was the first sign that this war would not be decided by firepower alone, but by something far more difficult to measure in the next part. We'll look at how this impossible system didn't just survive, but learned to outthink the most technologically advanced military in history, and that's where the real mystery begins. So how did it keep working? Here's where the story starts to get uncomfortable, especially if you're thinking in terms of modern warfare. American intelligence believed that they were fighting a single road. Find it, bomb it, erase it. That assumption shaped years of strategy, billions of dollars, and countless air missions. But it was wrong, because what they were really fighting was not a road at all, it was a living system. What we call the Ho Chi Minh Trail wasn't a fixed line on a map. It didn't begin in one place and end in another. It breathed. It shifted. It adapted. Thousands of small paths branched out like veins, some used once and abandoned, others rebuilt overnight. If one trail was bombed during the day, another appeared by night. If a route became too dangerous, traffic simply moved somewhere else. 2 American pilots flying overhead. The jungle looked empty, but that emptiness was an illusion. By day, movement stopped. Supplies were hidden under foliage. Paths were camouflaged. Even footprints were erased. Then, when darkness fell, the jungle came alive. Men and women moved silently. Bicycles rolled off and pushed, not ridden, each one carrying hundreds of pounds of rice, ammunition, or fuel. Porters walked for days, through rain and mud. Small boats slipped along rivers under cover of darkness. Trucks ran without headlights, engines muffled, guided only by memory, and sometimes there were no tools at all. Supplies were carried by hand. Think about that for a moment. In an era of jets, radar, and satellites, this supply network depended on human endurance, discipline, and timing. And there was another layer to the mystery. The trail didn't even stay inside Vietnam. Large portions of it ran through Laos and Cambodia, areas officially outside the main combat zones. That limited how and where American forces could strike, creating gray zones where the trail could survive, expand, and regroup. But even with these advantages, the question still hangs in the air. How did this system survive years of non-stop bombing? Millions of tons of explosives were dropped. Sensors were deployed to detect movement. Forests were stripped bare. Roads were cratered again and again by every technological measure. The trail should have collapsed. Instead, it kept working. Here's the part that often gets overlooked. Bombing destroyed infrastructure, but it also revealed intent. Every strike showed where Americans expected the trail to be, and that knowledge was used against them. Routes changed. Timing changed. Techniques evolved. This wasn't about resisting technology, it was about out-adapting it. The trail functioned less like a highway and more like water. Block one channel, and it flowed somewhere else. Apply pressure, and it spread out. And that's what made it so difficult to stop. You can bomb a bridge. You can crater a road. But how do you bomb an idea? How do you eliminate a system designed to expect to rebuilt anyway? By this point in the war, American commanders began to realize something unsettling. They weren't losing because of a lack of firepower. They were losing because they were fighting the wrong kind of enemy, in the wrong way. And in the next part, we'll see just how far this mishmash went when the most bombed supply network in history became stronger, not weaker under pressure. That's where the mystery deepens even further. A system built on adaptation. This is the moment where the story stops being abstract and starts becoming astonishing. Because by the late 1960s, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was no longer a desperate workaround. It was a fully functioning system that kept evolving faster than it could be destroyed at its peak. The trail wasn't a trail at all. It was a vast network stretching more than 20,000 kilometers of paths, roads, river routes, and jungle corridors, and wide enough for trucks. Others no more than footprints through mud and leaves. Some used once, others rebuilt dozens of times. And here's what made it remarkable. There were fuel pipelines, buried underground, running for hundreds of kilometers through forests and mountains quietly, delivering gasoline and diesel to the front lines. No trucks, no visible convoys, just fuel flowing invisibly beneath the earth. There were hidden storage depots, carved into hillsides or concealed under dense jungle canopies. From the air they looked like nothing. On the ground there were lifeline stockpiles of food, weapons, medicine, and spare parts waiting to be moved when the moment was right. And then there were the repair crews. Every airstrike left craters, roads shattered, bridges destroyed, but destruction was expected. Within hours sometimes, the same night teams were already at work, filling craters by hand, laying logs, rebuilding crossings, redirecting traffic. By morning, a road that had been erased was often usable again. Ask yourself this: what kind of system plans not just to survive attacked up to rebuild immediately afterward? Even the equipment reflected this mindset. Bicycles were reinforced with steel frames and wooden braces. These weren't for riding. They were for pushing, each one capable of carrying 300 to 400 kilograms of supplies. Rice, ammunition, mortar shells, fuel cans. One person, one bicycle, a load heavier than a small car engine, and they moved like this for miles. Porters didn't rely on maps, because maps could be captured or destroyed. Instead, they memorized terrain. Every bend in the path, every stream crossing, every landmark that didn't appear on paper. They moved at night. They rested during the day. They listened for aircraft. They adapted routes based on sound, weather, and risk. And when bombing destroyed a road, the trail didn't fight back, it didn't resist. It simply moved. Traffic shifted to parallel paths. Routes split into smaller ones. Movement slowed, spread out, and then reconnected farther south, like water finding new channels. The system absorbed damage and continued flowing. This is where many people misunderstand the story. That trail wasn't successful because it was strong, that it was successful because it was flexible. Strength can be shattered. Flexibility is harder to break. Every bomb forced change. Every change made the system smarter. Over time, what began as a rough supply route became something closer to an organism, one that learned from pressure instead of collapsing under it. And that raises an uncomfortable question. If the most heavily bombed supply network in history could adapt this well, what happens when technology faces a system designed not to win but to endure? In the next part, we'll see how this constant adaptation turned into a psychological war, one that left American commanders questioning whether victory was even possible. Because by then, it was no longer just about roads, it was about limits. The most bombed place in history by this point in the war, frustration had turned into obsession. The United States was no longer just fighting enemy troops in South Vietnam. It was fighting a supply system that refused to die. The Ho Chi Minh Trail. So Washington escalated. What followed was one of the most intense bombing campaigns ever directed at a single logistical network in human history. Millions of tons of bombs were dropped across jungles, mountains, river valleys, and suspected routes. Entire regions were struck again and again, sometimes the same coordinates within days or even hours. The goal was simple: break the flow. Alongside conventional bombing came chemical warfare. Defoliants like Agent Orange was sprayed to strip away jungle cover, exposing paths that had been hidden for years. The logic was straightforward: if the jungle disappears, the trail becomes visible. and if it becomes visible, it can be destroyed. Then came technology. Seismic sensors were dropped into the forest floor, designed to detect footsteps, bicycle tires, even heartbeats. Acoustic sensors listened for engines. Infrared sensors searched for heat signatures at night. Data poured into command centers where analysts tracked movement on glowing screens. By any modern standard, this was overwhelming force, and by the end of the war, the numbers were staggering. More bombs were dropped on areas connected to the trail than were used in all of World War II across Europe and the Pacific combined. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military on Earth unleashed its full technological might on a supply network running through jungle and mountains, and yet supplies kept flowing. Weapons still reached the front. Food still arrived. Fuel still moved south. For American commanders, this was deeply unsettling, because survival was one thing, but this looked like something else. Every new tactic seemed to trigger a countermove. Sensors were detected and avoided. Bombed routes were bypassed. Heavy strikes led to decentralization, smaller movements, quieter movements, movements that were harder to track. The more pressure applied, the more adapted the system became. And that's when the realization began to sink in. This wasn't a battle of firepower versus firepower. It was a battle of thinking styles. American strategy was built on the idea that enough force applied precisely would eventually overwhelm any system. But the trail didn't behave like a system designed to be defended. It behaved like a system designed to be sacrificed and rebuilt. Bombing assumed permanence: fixed roads, fixed depots, fixed targets. The trail assumed destruction. In fact, it planned for it. Every attack revealed patterns. Every bombing campaign showed where attention was focused, and that information was quietly absorbed and used to reshape the network again. This is where the psychological toll began to matter. Pilots flew missions, knowing the same areas would be hit tomorrow and the next day, and the next intelligence reports showed damage, but not collapse. Success on paper didn't translate into strategic victory, and that creates a dangerous question in any war. What if your enemy is not trying to protect what you're destroying? What if they're using your attacks as part of their strategy? By the late stages of the conflict, it became clear that the trail wasn't just enduring punishment, it was learning from it. It was adapting faster than technology could keep up, and that's why this phase of the war left such a lasting mark, just on the land, but on the minds of those fighting it. Because when a system survives the heaviest bombing in history, the problem is no longer tactical, it's existential. In the final part, we'll confront the real twist of this story: why the trail was never truly about roads or supplies at all, and what it ultimately revealed about the limits of modern warfare. The trail was never the secret. Here's the twist, the part of the story that changes how everything before it makes sense. The real power of the Ho Chi Minh Trail was not its roads, not its camouflage, not even its sheer size. Those were symptoms. The real strength was the mindset behind it. From the outside, American planners saw something concrete: paths, trucks, bridges, depots, and they treated the trail the way modern militaries are trained to treat infrastructure. Identify it, target it, destroy it. But the people who built and maintained the trail were playing a very different game. This system was never designed to be protected. It was designed to be lost and rebuilt. Instead of a rigid chain of command, it relied on decentralization. Decisions didn't always flow from the top down. Local units adjusted routes on their own. If one section failed, the rest didn't collapse. It adapted. Instead of advanced machines, it relied on human endurers, men and women who carried supplies through rain, heat, and bombing, not because it was efficient, but because it was reliable. Technology can be disabled. Human determination is harder to shut down, and instead of fixed plans, it relied on flexibility. Nothing was permanent. Routes changed, timetables shifted. What mattered wasn't speed or elegancy, it was continuity. This is where the misunderstanding became fatal. American strategy assumed that if you apply enough pressure, the system will break. But that only works if the system values stability more than survival. The trail didn't. Every bomb assumed the enemy wanted to preserve what was being destroyed. But what if they didn't? What if destruction was already built into the plan? In that case, bombing doesn't end the system, it becomes part of it. Think about what it would actually take to destroy the trail completely. You wouldn't just need to bomb roads. You wouldn't just need to stop trucks. You wouldn't just need better sensors. You would need to break the will of the people who rebuilt it every night. And that's not a logistical problem, that's a human one. History shows us that when wars reach this point, when victory depends on erasing motivation rather than material, they enter dangerous territory. Because technology can dominate land and air, but it struggles against belief, discipline, and purpose. The Ho Chi Minh Trail exposed that limit. It revealed that modern warfare, for all its precision and power, still depends on assumptions, and when those assumptions are wrong, even overwhelming force can fail. That's why the trail wasn't just a supply route, it was a lesson that endurance can outlast firepower. that adaptability can neutralize superiority, and that the most impossible systems often succeed because they are built for reality, not theory. So when we look back at the trail today, the question isn't how it survived. The real question is why we ever thought it wouldn't, because in the end, the trail didn't defeat technology, it simply refused to be defined by it. And that's why this story still matters long after the jungle paths have faded, because it reminds us that history isn't always shaped by the strongest force, but by the system that refuses to stop moving. When we step back and look at the full story, the Ho Chi Minh Trail forces us to rethink something much bigger than one war. It forces us to rethink how wars are actually won. For decades, military planners believed victory followed a simple formula: better technology, more firepower, superior control of the air, and in many conflicts, that logic worked. But the Ho Chi Minh Trail exposed the limits of that thinking, because here was a supply system that faced the most advanced weapons of its time, and survived not by matching technology with technology, not by overpowering the enemy, but by out them. The trail proved that technology alone does not guarantee victory. Bombs can destroy roads, bridges, and buildings, but they cannot automatically destroy resolve. Sensors can detect movement, but they cannot measure determination. Aircraft can dominate the sky, but they cannot occupy every inch of jungle, every footpath, every human decision. It also proved something more unsettling. Adaptation can defeat superiority, and every time pressure increased, the system adjusted, routes shifted, methods changed, people learned. The trail didn't try to be perfect, it tried to be resilient, and resilience, over time, became stronger than precision. Think about how often we assume the most advanced solution is also the most effective one. The trail challenges that assumption. It reminds us that systems designed for flexibility often outperform systems designed for control, especially in unpredictable environments. And then there is the third lesson, the quiet one that often gets overlooked. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is persistence, not speed, not efficiency, not elegance. Persistence. The willingness to rebuild what has been destroyed, to move supplies one step at a time, to accept loss without abandoning the mission. That kind of persistence doesn't show up clearly on maps or intelligence briefings, but over years it reshapes outcomes. In the end, the Ho Chi Minh Trail didn't just supply a war, it changed how wars could be fought. It demonstrated that decentralized systems can survive concentrated attacks, that human endurance can compensate for material disadvantage, and that victory is not always decided by who strikes hardest, but by who keeps going the longest. This is why the trail still matters today, not because the paths are still there. Most of them aren't, not because the war is still being fought. It isn't, but because the questions it raises are timeless. What happens when force meets flexibility? What happens when power confronts patience? What happens when a system is built not to avoid failure but to absorb it? Those questions extend far beyond Vietnam. They apply to conflicts, to organizations, even to personal struggles. They remind us that success often belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. So when historians call the Ho Chi Minh Trail one of the most impossible military supply routes ever built, they're only half right. What made it remarkable wasn't that it was impossible, it's that, against every expectation, it worked, and in doing so, it left behind one of history's most enduring lessons. You can destroy roads, you can bomb infrastructure, but breaking a system built on persistence is far harder than it looks. That is why the Ho Chi Minh Trail remains, not just a relic of war but a reminder of how resilience can quietly reshape history.